One-page rules is becoming quite the thing in my information bubble. I knew about the project for a very long time, but it never quite really got me hooked, since it was purely 28mm and basically another 40k reprint, at least at the time. That was years ago. That changed some time ago when I noticed a 6mm Imperial Guard army image tagged with ready to play one-page rules. After asking how, I got the answer that they made some experimental rules which would allow it. Noted mentally and ignored for later. And now is that later? After buying and reading through the rulebook, I decided to give it a go. As mentioned, the game is designed with 28mm in mind. There is a dedicated section on how to play in smaller scales and or with multi-based miniatures, but it was not to our liking, so we decided to take the route 1 28mm infantry model equals 1 6mm infantry stand and see how it goes. Before we dive any further, I need to make two things clear. 1. Both me and my opponent bought the extended rulebook, but in the end we didn't use any of the official extended rules, at least not knowingly. The rule that we did introduce was taken directly from the epic Armageddon tournament scene, and it states that all terrain is either area terrain and or impassable terrain. I'm mentioning the extended rulebook to emphasize that in the end we use the core free rules and mission cards. In order to recreate our experience, you do not have to purchase it, although I strongly encourage you to purchase it and support the creators. And number 2, this comparison is drawn after playing a lot of epic Armageddon games and only a few one-page rule games. I'm not an OPR veteran, but I know good, bad mechanics when I see them, or at least that's what I believe. I will not go into super nitty-gritty mechanical details, at least not all of the time. I'm going to present this more or less as a comparison to epic Armageddon rules. With that said, let's start the summary. I believe that Grimdark Future, with the 2 rules changes we introduced, is a really nice game. The scale change worked perfectly, besides a minor inconvenience, more about it later. We had a lot of fun playing, and you can really feel that the rules are streamlined for speed rather than fluff accuracy. It's a similar experience to Epic in a way that makes the game enjoyable but different. For me, OPR is a mixture of Songs of Blades and Heroes, 2-hour wargame Star Army, and Epic Armageddon. If you are familiar with one of those games, there will be only a few surprises. If you know more than one, then the introductory process is going to be even smoother. Jumping into details in more or less epic gameplay order. There is no such thing as an epic garrison. The closest thing would be units with the scout ability, which can move right after deployment. There is no strategy rating for armies or units. First move is determined at the start by the deployment roll, which means no more always going second when you play as guard against marines, and non-broken/pinned units always do as they are ordered. It removes the suspense, aka gambling, element in favor of predictability and speed. The initiative rules are much less complicated but still have a nice twist. There is no initiative retaining like Epic has. This means that it's a strictly alternating activation system. This can be both a good and a bad thing. I can recall using the retain initiative on more than one occasion to push an assault forward or attack in 2 different directions to overwhelm my enemy before he can react. I can also recall, even more times, when I was on the receiving end of that mechanism and got decimated, especially when playing Eldar since they can retain twice in a row. This makes for a less complex mechanism, aka faster, simpler gameplay. As I mentioned, there's only one who goes first roll-off. That does not mean, however, that the order is static and set in stone. It's an interesting mechanic in which the side which runs out of activations quicker will start the next round. In other words, the more elite or more destroyed army will act first. Quite an interesting twist. This actually means that at some point in the round, not really at the beginning since you can't lose units, you can predict with increasing certainty who will go on first next round, and thanks to that, act accordingly. For example, deploying your ambush units. Again, streamlined mechanics which work for this game. Moving to the units. Stat-wise, they are very similar. The only minor difference is that unit quality decides how likely a weapon is to hit rather than the weapon itself. This speeds up the game nicely since you always act on the same number with the same unit. Next, the elephant in the room. Everything in Grimdark Future is super slow, and I really mean it. All units have the same speed. That speed is 6 inches, a little bit over 15 centimeters. The value for fast units is 8 inches, a little bit over 20 centimeters. A unit in the basic rules can either move and shoot, or move 2 times without shooting. Well, it can end in melee. This means that a human APC can move up to 20 centimeters in a round and fire its weapons, or move 40 centimeters without firing. In comparison, the same APC in Epic can either move 30 centimeters and fire, move 60 centimeters and fire with less accuracy, or move 90 centimeters without firing. The base speed in OPR is the slowest speed in Epic. You can forget about dynamic flanking maneuvers and fast deployments from one flank to the other. In that regard, OPR is much more of a static game than Epic. But, on the other hand, there is no Overwatch in base OPR rules, so you don't need to worry about triggering 4 Overwatch fires from enemy formations by accident. True story for yours truly during Epic World Championship 2019. And objectives are used a bit differently. For example, there is no blitz objective. That will be almost unreachable with the given speed and game length. And you don't need to keep units on an objective to control it all the time. It's different and less dynamic, but not in an obviously worse way. It is critical to say that less dynamic doesn't mean sluggish or static. It simply means less dynamic. There are still some interesting twists that you can do with ambushing units, which are definitely more available to armies in comparison to teleporting units in Epic. On the other hand, ranges are longer than in Epic, and most units have no problem in shooting to targets located very far away. The most common range in Epic would be either 30 or 45 centimeters, so 12 to 18 inches, with the base rifle range in OPR is 24 inches, 60 centimeters. There are of course shorter and longer ranges for specific weapons. This is just an average. This means that units are less likely to be out of range and, quote, useless, but it also can lead to a more static game. Fire separation. Non-existent in Epic Armageddon. For a good reason. I think it would not fit the mechanics. Really shines in Grimdark Future. It really helps to thin the enemy ranks down. Besides being a mechanics choice, I also think that this actually streamlines the game. Instead of figuring out where I want to strike to maximize firepower, I can simply move into cover and fire at different targets. While on the topic of firepower, in OPR there is no anti-personnel, anti-tank weapon categories. Everything can fire at everything, but different save modifications means that some weapons will penetrate more than others. In-game, this change is almost non-noticeable. It actually speeds up a little. A bit of a surprise were the artillery blast templates. They are not present in OPR. There are blast rules that allow you to hit more elements of a unit in a single shot, but the way they are stated means that a single volley cannot target 2 intermingled formations. Finishing up on firepower, one last note. While creating my army for the first time, I noticed that some weapons have a deadly special rule. At first I thought that it's a direct translation of the Titan Killer rule in Epic, which would mean that it's a useful but not really required thing most of the time. I was severely wrong. You need some deadly weapons to eliminate enemy vehicles. Consider deadly more like a dedicated Titan Killer / macro weapon. You want to have a few in your army. Speaking of vehicles, all vehicles have hit points, in contrast to Epic Armageddon. where only war engines have hit points. Big units, considered war engines in epic terms, have 24 points, while normal vehicles have anything between 6 and 12, depending on the armor class. This means that their survivability is quite bigger than in Armageddon. Also important, in epic, aircraft are basically a game within a game. The rules are similar, but yet different to what the ground units have to adhere. So it's an additional step of complication. In GDF, aircraft rules are pretty similar. There are some differences, but those differences are almost cosmetic. There are no big changes from the standard ground rules, and that's a really nice touch. Let's talk a little bit about the issues that we encountered while playing. While absolutely not blogging, they might be an annoyance to some of the people that are more reality focused. First things related to the picture that you're seeing on the screen now. I was actually a bit shocked and confused that 90% of my entire force started in the palace grounds and there was still room to spare. It looked a bit off. I thought that in 28mm that would probably not happen. But then I realized that in 28mm that palace and its grounds would be half the table or bigger. So definitely spacious enough. That positioning was also a direct result of the no blast templates in the game. I have a gut feeling, that is not confirmed by anything other than my observations, that in this scale vehicles actually have an advantage over infantry because their footprint is way smaller and it's pretty easy to hide a single vehicle behind the terrain feature. In 28mm that would be very hard or basically impossible. Finishing up on issues with vehicles, one thing needs to be stated out loud. It wasn't a problem for us, but I can see that it can be a problem for some people. It's the fact that in this convention that we used, that one model in 28mm, one stand of infantry in 6mm, transport vehicles basically become clown cars. As I said, not really an issue for us, but I can definitely imagine more than a few people gritting their teeth for it. There is an easy solution to the problem which I just stated, and I would like to try it out. It should also help with the size advantage I mentioned earlier. If you check out the 6mm Age of Tyrants miniature line, they have pretty nice vehicles that are on the bigger side of the scale. They should work perfectly for this OPR convention. This video is already longer than I expected, so let's come back to non-issues and wrap things up. Two defining elements of Epic Armageddon that are clearly different in GDF are blast markers. They're completely non-present in the core rules. There is an additional module in GDF that introduces some kind of blast marker. They're called suppression tokens, but they work not exactly the same. They feel a bit overpowered comparing to blast markers, but I didn't use them, so it's really hard to say. And the second defining feature of Epic Armageddon, which is very different in GDF, are assaults. Where epic assaults are intricate strategic moves requiring planning and preparation, OPR assaults are simply blunt force or trauma. There are a few twists that make OPR assaults a bit different than pure close combat. For example, you can actually eliminate a unit instantaneously if it gets enough damage and fails its quality check. But the biggest change is that there are no bonuses other than inflicted casualties. Outnumbering the enemy, being suppression free, or being led by an inspiring character doesn't add up to your assault resolution. This translates to a much less complicated and thus faster mechanic, but you can definitely feel the loss of options. So after all this, what's my final conclusion? These are two different games that can be played in a similar operation scale. While Epic can be much more dynamic in terms of maneuvering, GDF definitely has the speed advantage in terms of overall gameplay. The fact that one-page rules is exactly what it says, a single page of rules, is also a huge advantage over Epic, when it comes to pulling in new players. That should be much easier. Both games scratch a similar itch and will be appearing on my table. For now, I can say with a lot of confidence that GDF will not replace Epic Armageddon for me. Hope you enjoyed this short summary. If you did, remember to like, share and subscribe. And if you would like me to expand and prepare a bit more in-depth comparison, maybe with some additional modules, or a comparison of Epic and a completely different game, drop a comment below. Thanks for watching, have a good one.